innovation and technology. And accelerators to access new markets, find their trusted partner in the Mediterranean, and create new perspectives, knowledge, and networks. Incubators and accelerators and technology transfer offices play a key role in promoting the development of innovation businesses. They enable startups and SMEs to engage in new business opportunities by offering them support, advice, monitoring, and coaching, as well as access to essential network contacts. To harness the advantage of innovation and disruptive technology, the African-European Innovation Partnership is funded by the European Commission, and the team is based in both Africa and Europe, who is leading the initiative in close collaboration and advisory board experts, as well as key players from both continents. And today in our final event, we are hosting our speaker, Mohamed Sabone, who will talk with us about the role of accelerators. Mohamed has 10 years of experience in digital and tech startups from the investor, founder, and accelerator sides. His functional areas range from initial concept validation, venture building, businesses, model design, financial modeling, fundraising, and transaction structuring. His latest role include co-founder of Moodfit, MD of Dubai FinTech Accelerator, and currently venture lead at Rainmaking. Mohamed holds a master's in mechanical engineering from the Lebanese University and an MBA from the American University of Beirut. Thank you, Mohamed, for being with us. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Hi, Rim.
Hello. So I'll let you share your screen right now to show us more about the role of accelerators.
Give me a second. Can you see the screen and the full screen or just the window?
Yes.
And it's changing, right?
Yes.
All right, perfect. Right, thank you, Rim, for the introduction. I'm excited to be on the final event. Hi, everyone. So, I'm just sure. Okay, it's all working. Perfect. Okay, so as you mentioned, I'm going to be talking about the role, impact, and the future of startup accelerators. So, quick word about my background, and then a couple of things about logistics for the workshop, and then we'll get right into it. So as I mentioned, I've been working with tech startups for the last 10 years. Mostly I've had the chance to work from a venture capital side. I also co-founded my own company, still there. And recently I joined the Startup Bootcamp and Rainmaking to work from the accelerator, support, and venture building sides. So I really had the chance over the last years to look at the market or the startup ecosystem from various perspectives, and I'm gonna try my best to tell you more about the experience I've had with the startups from both running one, the Startup Bootcamp FinTech Accelerator in Dubai, and then we joined a couple of programs also as a startup. So that's briefly my background. Couple of logistic points for the day. So feel free to ask any questions at any point. I want to make this as engaging as possible, as interactive as possible. So whenever you have any questions about anything, I think you have to raise your hand on Zoom, and then you'll be allowed to ask questions. And we can have a conversation about any of the topics. If there's anything, any of the terms, any of the points that is not clear, or want me to dig deeper into, just also feel free to send me a message on chat or raise your hand. Then all of that we can take from there. All right. So to get started, what we're gonna cover. Okay. So what we're going to cover today is a couple of things. So we're going to define what accelerators are, what the value proposition, what the main activities that an accelerator does. I'm going to go into the different models, what that are out there, what are the characteristics, variations, revenue model of accelerators, and see how an accelerator impacts an ecosystem or a community or the entrepreneurial community. I have a couple of case studies from 2 countries. on how the ecosystem really evolved. And finally, we're going to talk a bit about the future of accelerators, what's happening in that market, and what are the next steps? What are the next steps of evolution? Right. So we have 2 hours, I guess, a bit less, and we'll get right into it. Okay. So let's start by defining accelerators. So really, what is the main function? What is the value proposition of an accelerator? So the purpose is to transfer know-how or teach how to build a startup, and this is usually done by staging or running a limited duration program, usually a bootcamp or an accelerator. Our cohort has multiple names that usually runs for 3 to 6 months. That's really the core definition of what an accelerator is. But if you want to dive a bit deeper into what an accelerator really offers, there's a couple of things we can look at. One, it's a consulting or a technology assistance. So these are the soft skills in a way that an accelerator teaches the founders. It's the business skills, the technical skills. This ranges from anything from sales, marketing, business model canvas to legal, fundraising, all the toolbox that a startup really needs. So these are the soft skills that the founders will acquire over the life of their startup going forward. And that's really the core element, in my opinion. And then one of the 2 core elements. The second one is the infrastructure. So this is the office space pre-COVID in a way. So this is less and less important at this time. It's the infrastructure in terms of this core or the common grounds where the startups meet. Some accelerators even offer some accounting and admin back office services. So this is something that could be of value for the startups. The second core component that I think, along with business development and the consultancy, it's the network. So the biggest reason I think, beside the know-how, is the access to customers, potential investors, mentors. So an accelerator really gives the startup, the founders, a lot of exposure to the ecosystem, to the industry players, to people who can help. So mentors who've been in the founder shoes and then want to help other startups, or investors that are looking for opportunities to invest in. So this exposure, if the accelerator has a really solid network, this is a core element of the accelerator. And finally, and I consider this less important than the other, is the cash, the financial investment. So this is something that all accelerators really offer. To certain variations, some accelerators offer more than the others. But what differentiates an accelerator really is the quality of the network and the mentors and trainers that they bring on board for the startups. So the financial is the 4th component. We'll go into details on each one then later down the line. Checking if there's anything in the chat. All right, we're good to go. So before going forward, I just want to clarify something that is usually confused. It's difference between an incubator and accelerator. So there are different points really that makes the difference. But if you want to look at the 3 main things or 4 main things, it's the way that, for me, the biggest difference in incubator is an establishment or an entity that hosts the startups on a continuous basis and doesn't really necessarily have a structured program or a curriculum for to teach the startups. It's while the accelerator, they have a structured recruitment process where they bring 1 or 2 cohorts per year, usually about 10 startups per cohort. And they bring into the space, or if it's virtual, then to the hub of the accelerator, and give them and guide them or take them through 3 to 4 months of consultancy, of business development, or of learnings. And usually they take an equity stake against that. So if you want to join an accelerator, you have to give up some percentage of the company, while the incubator doesn't have to be like that. The incubator in a lot of cases will charge rent on the office space or the desk that they're taking. The accelerator has a much bigger focus on the mentoring and the business development, while an accelerator has a focus on the mentoring and the fundraising and the pitching, while the incubator is really more, doesn't have that exact same structure. See some chat. Hey everyone. If you want to look at what an accelerator does, if you want to dive deeper into what the activities that they do. So we usually split the activities into 3 phases. We start by recruiting, and this is where an accelerator really goes out and spreads the word about their new cohort. So they say we're going to start a cohort in Q3 2021, for example, and we are going to be focused around a certain vertical or stage or geography. We'll see that later. And they start taking applications and screening them in order to choose the best startups to join the program. So that usually takes anything between 1 to 2 months in the beginning, at least. Then once the 10 startup, the cohort defined or the startups chosen for that program, there's an acceleration period that is usually around 3 months. We rarely see 6 months of accelerators anymore. But during these 3 months is the main learning period for the founders. Where they meet mentors, coaches, investors. The accelerator team really dives deep into the core or the building blocks of the startup in order to figure out what's the best business model, what's the go-to-market strategy. And so once usually that accelerator period ends with Demo Day, where all the startups, there's this big event where all the startups just pitch on stage for the investors, for the mentors, for the general public, basically just like a graduation for them. Once that is done, the accelerator job doesn't end there. Because they are equity partners or they have a percentage in the company, then in this case, it's there's a portfolio management that needs to be done. So basically, the accelerator or the accelerator team supports the startups in their go-to-market and their fundraising. Whenever there's something they can support on, they do. All right. So any questions here before I move on to the next section about definition of an accelerator, the activities that are being done, the difference between incubator and accelerator, and then we can move into the different models of the accelerator models.
We don't have questions till now, so I guess you can continue, and then if there's any questions, I would let you know.
All right. Okay, cool. So going into accelerator models. So as you can imagine, there's multiple ways to do this. It's depending on the stage of the company, depending on what verticals you're going after, depending on the purpose of the accelerator. So I tried to bring that down to 4 characteristics, 4 different ways to characterize or to classify accelerators. So number 1 is, how is this accelerator funded? So an accelerator, beside investing cash in the startups, they need some funding themselves to hire people, to pay rent, to pay for the mentors, for the trainers, all of that. So that's one. We'll go into that. And then second thing is, what startups are they taking? Which stage are they? So are they at an MVP stage? Are they idea stage? Is it seed or scale ups, seed plus? So all of that makes a difference on how you want to structure the program. Third is the specialization. So what are they focused on? What is this accelerator focusing on? Is it types? They're horizontal and vertical, whereby horizontal one is really focused on a technology. So let's say health sector, for example. Then last but not least, it's basically based on geography and where is this accelerator operating? Is it a city, a country, regional, international? That's something we can look at. So to look at how the accelerator is funded, we identified 3 types of accelerators in a way. So one, we call it the deal flow maker, and this is usually a private investors who are looking to expand their deal flow. So usually what happens with investors or VCs is that they are looking into the market, seeing what are the ideas out there, or what are the startups that are in the market to invest in them. So one way to increase the number of opportunities to invest in is by establishing an accelerator. So that's how you see Y Combinator 500 startups, Startup Bootcamp. All of these guys, they have, sorry, not Startup Bootcamp, Y Combinator 500 startups. All of these have private investors backing. Basically, what happens is that whenever a startup graduates, or even before that from the accelerator, these investors would look at them and decide which one they want to invest in. And the main purpose of this is just to generate returns. This is pure financial play for these investors. Second one is what we call an ecosystem builder. And usually these are corporates corporate sponsored, whereby companies like taking the example of Disney or IKEA want to invest in the ecosystem to come up with ideas that could help them. So these guys are always looking for the next big idea in their industry. They don't want to become obsolete. So they're always looking for innovation, for new founders to collaborate with, or to eventually acquire or merge with. So they set up these accelerators to bring in all the ideas in that market or in that vertical and be close to them. So what happens when that is achieved? Basically, they identify early on which are the ideas or the startups that have the potential to change the industry, and they start working with them early on to basically control the market, or later down the line to acquire them actually. And we see this model more and more with big corporates like Disney or IKEA. They set up their own accelerators. Or if you take other accelerators like Techstars or Startup Bootcamp, they are backed by corporates, and the purpose is to encourage this collaboration between the startups and the corporates. And finally, the last type is what we call the welfare simulator. And this is usually funded by governments, universities, or other NGOs. And the main purpose is the development of these skills with the target segment. So it could be social issues, it could be financial welfare, it could be decreasing of employment, or finding a solution for a social problem, homelessness, inequality, some other stuff. So these, I'm taking the example of Dubai Future Accelerators in this case, where there was a clear
Okay, so I guess there was an internet problem, but he will join us soon. Sorry for that. We'll make sure he is joining. Hey,
Hey, sorry, got disconnected.
don't worry, don't worry.
Share my screen again. Right. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay, sorry about that. So I was saying, so this is sort of funding. This is how we classify accelerators depending on that. If you want to look at the startup stage, then if you can see, and then the second column, this is where accelerators usually come in. And that happens usually where there is already an MVP. It's rare to see accelerators before that. There is, but at the idea stage, if they don't have an MVP, then it becomes difficult to really follow up or grow. Usually it takes a bit of commitment from the founders to join the accelerator. So they have to be full-time. They need to have a basic product usually, or very close to having one, in order to really benefit from the accelerator. Anything before that, it becomes like startup competition area or incubators or really less structured programs. But you can see that when the accelerator finishes their program, then it comes into seed capital and venture capital. And that's really the purpose, a big purpose of the startup joining accelerator. They want to make sure that they take this MVP, iterate the product or the business model in order to be ready to take investors on board. And this is also the purpose of this cash investment that the accelerator puts in the startup. It's just the minimum required to really get to a stable product, or not stable product, say just MVP that they can test and validate with the market. One way to differentiate accelerators also is by we call it horizontal or vertical, how they're doing. So I'll start with the vertical. It's a vertical focused accelerator is usually really focused on one specific industry. So it could be fintech, retail, fashion, logistics, and the reason is that this has two immediate implications, let's say. So one, it's harder to find accelerators in a specific vertical. So getting good startups could be harder. But the advantage is that you can really focus on that vertical and bring in as many mentors as possible, and that can help these startups. So instead of bringing mentors from everywhere, it's just bringing experts in logistics, for example, or experts in fashion. So it adds much more value to the startups. See, you have a question. No open questions. Okay.
No, actually, we have questions.
Yeah.
We have a question from Obina Echendu, and he's asking first if we can share the presentation. We will see this later, but also he wants to have some recommendations of accelerators program funding pre-seed startups.
Okay. Depending on the location. So for pre-seed, it's usually depending on the location, depending on the stage we're saying pre-seed, depending on the vertical. I don't have an answer that is quite general for everyone, but usually what happens, a good resource to find what's happening in the accelerator is F6S. I'm gonna send it on the chat. So if you go to f6s, I think .com, if I'm not mistaken, then you can check all the accelerators that are running all over the world, and you can filter by stage, by industry, by if do they invest, all of those, and you can apply directly on that platform. So that's one way to to see what's happening out there. The second way is, if it's not on F6S, then I would check what's I would check what's happening in terms of innovation programs in the country or in the region, media outlets, existing incubators. I would go and visit them and see what's happening, and they usually have the information about when the program is being launched. So that's, I hope that answers your question.
We have also another question from Vicky Kilcoyne. She's asking about grant funding for startups, because it was on the slide, but text was small.
Okay. So grants, accelerators, if they are financially driven, let's say if they are corporate, or, so if you go back to this slide. So deal flow makers or ecosystem builders, these are usually driven by financial returns down the line. So they don't give grants without expecting equity or percentage return. If you find welfare simulators, these are the accelerators and incubators funded by governments, then it's more likely that they have grants for startups for early stage. And generally speaking, grants come in a stage before the accelerators, especially the small ones for ideas. So you get small amounts just to allow you to build the basic MVP and that will allow you later on to get into an accelerator. Does that answer your questions? Okay.
I think it's good.
I can see a reply. All right, perfect. Okay. So continuing, spoke about the vertical accelerators. The horizontal ones are less focused on a specific industry and more on a technology. So a theme or a technology. So you can say, for example, smart cities, or crypto, or augmented reality. So when you have that wide of application criteria or theme, then it's easier to bring startups on board. But the mentors and the workshops would be harder to manage because you have such a wide, the startups that will join are pretty diversified. They're not focused on a specific industry. I see 2 messages.
So someone raised hands.
Sure, Makani. Go ahead.
Louise Ayandokun, if you want to speak, you can. I think you're muted.
Louise, you have a question?
Louise from Incubator, you raised your hand. So if you want to speak, you can unmute your mic. Or maybe you can put it in the chat if it's not working. I think it's not working for her. Yeah. So, it worked. Yeah. No, I think she or he backed up. So if you want to talk, you can raise your hands and you can put your questions in the Q&A box. So in the chat. So go ahead, Mohammed, I will let you continue.
Okay, all right. So if you want to look at how accelerators make money, you can imagine that is very closely related to the way what's their purpose. So that's one. So you see on the vertical axis, it's the 3 types of accelerators that we spoke about. So welfare simulator, ecosystem builders, and deal flow makers. And the other way to do this is based on the startup stage. So you can imagine the more advanced a startup is, they can pay first they can pay fees, and definitely they can give equity in that case. So for example, let's take the example of the first case where a welfare simulator, where this is a non-financially driven accelerator. The purpose is to drive welfare or social mission. You can imagine that they can take really early stage companies and they can do it for free because they don't care about the financial return. And then the more advanced, they can afford to take equity of the companies. And the more you go down vertically towards the ecosystem builders or deal flow makers, then these type of accelerators want to make return eventually. So they either charge you certain fees if there's a scale up, or they take equity in the company. They rarely do MVP stage companies or pre-MVP stage companies because usually it's very risky and it's not worth the investment. So they take equity or fees as the startups evolve. I see a Q&A. Okay, so what's the difference between an MVP and a seed stage? A seed stage company usually has an MVP and already has some commercial traction. So they have a base of clients, they have people using the product, while an MVP is just that. It's a minimum viable product, doesn't necessarily mean that there are people using it. It could be still in beta testing where there's a couple of people just trying out the product, but it's not launched publicly. A seed stage, in order to get a seed stage, you need to have a product that is available publicly for everyone to come in and use, not just people that you give them access to.
We have another question. What are the rules or guidelines to giving equity to accelerator? Let's say I have a company, what should I consider when giving my company equity to an investor accelerator? From Silas Omurung.
Yeah, Silas, so two things. Let's separate investors from accelerators because they act very differently. So for an accelerator, usually they take anywhere between 3 or 5 to 10%. That's what an accelerator gives. But again, depends on the stage. And if you're talking about early stage companies, usually 5% is fair, 5 to 6%, as sometimes go up to 10, sometimes a bit less, 3 to 4, depending on the amount they invest. When you're talking to investors, this is completely different because the amounts that you ask for or the amounts that you're going to raise are much higher. So instead of talking about, like, say, 30 or 20,000 US dollars, we're talking about $500,000 and above. So what you want to do usually, this is a completely different conversation, but when talking to an investor, you never want to give to the investor more than 20, 25% every time per round. So at the seed stage, you raise 500,000, you give 20%. And the Series A, you raise 3 million, you give another 20%. So that's where it goes. Every round shouldn't be more than 20, 25% maximum, all right? All right. Do accelerators sign NDAs with founders? Usually not, because unless there's super confidential intellectual property, you're doing something very deep tech, they don't sign NDAs. And the reason is they see a lot of companies. So a typical accelerator cohort will get 500 to 1,500 application. So imagine signing an NDA with each one of those. Same thing for a lot of the investors. They rarely sign an NDA, especially in early stages. Later down the line, when you have patents, where you have intellectual property that is confidential, that is critical to your business, then in that case, or you want to tell them more numbers and it's become very competitive, then they sign NDAs. Before that, it rarely happens. We don't sign NDAs with any of the startups that we join, that we bring on board.
I have a question. I want to ask about public accelerators, because in Europe, there's a lot of public accelerators that don't take a huge percentage from their startups. But the question is, how do they make revenue if they're funded by the government and they're supposed to be a social enterprise or a non-profit organization? So is it a model to be just sustained, or if someone is thinking to orient their accelerator as a public one, it's just, it doesn't make any huge revenue, for your opinion?
So accelerators don't make revenue in the first 10 years. That's usually what happens. Even the ones that are financially driven, until you bring in the startups and run a couple of cohorts, and then the startups grow and then exit potentially to someone, there's little to no revenue in the first 7 to 10 years of an accelerator. So it's going to require funding for the fast period to get it. So that's in the usual case. In an accelerator that is government, that is run by government, or that has a social aspect, then there doesn't need to be a revenue model. The return, the way we see it, is economical on the long run. So it's building that talent. It's building the foundation for entrepreneurs that could fail the first time, but then again, they will do it another time. So it's building that set of skills and building a community. We get to that, the impact of accelerators. It's building a community that can support future accelerators. So the impact could come later down the line in terms of percentage of GDP, in terms of talented labor, talented people who stay in the country and then build the foundation for the next round of startups or companies or SMEs.
Perfect, thank you.
All right. Any questions? No, all there. So getting to that point, so what's the impact of accelerators on a market or on an ecosystem? So in order to talk about that, so we need to look at what really constitutes an ecosystem. What's an entrepreneurial ecosystem? What are the building blocks that allow this ecosystem to emerge and then become sustainable by itself? So there are a couple of things. I'm not going to go into all of the details, but you can check them later. But you can see there are 6 main components. And quickly speaking, we start by the policy, the government, and this is just setting the economic foundation, the regulations for these startups to emerge. That's one. Finance, cash. It could be private investors, it could be grants, it could be university funds, angel investors, individuals, financing all that, all these activities. Culture. This is an interesting point. We can talk about this forever. So there are certain cultures that tolerate failure better than others. So I can tell you, for example, that in the Middle East, where I come from, failure is not something that is very tolerated. So when you talk about entrepreneurship, about startups, then failure is something that you have to embrace it. You have to accept that 90% of the companies actually fail. So if you don't like those odds, then don't get into it. So there's a big component where the existing culture needs to tolerate that startups can fail and will fail. While, for example, if we talk about more in the US, it's encouraged. It's a badge of honor where startups or founders fail their startup and then start another one. So that plays a big role in emerging in this. Markets. The bigger the market, the better how advanced the market is in technology and or a specific industry. That's definitely how big is it for the startups to grow and then attract the finance. Then human capital. If you don't have that, this is where a big role. This is where the government funded accelerators or programs really play a big role to learn to push to create that skilled labor layer where founders can go and build their startups, give them the basic, the essential knowledge to really start a company or start a startup. Then finally, there's a lot of support coming in from different areas, infrastructure, all the back office functions, and then non-government institutions that really work towards building this ecosystem. So this is what it takes to build this environment, this ecosystem, and each one of these components is essential. So you can't really you can't just focus on finance and say I'm gonna dump X $100 million in the market and then everything else will work out. It really has to be a holistic approach where all of these elements, all of these functions are looked at in the same time to support the startups. Because what happens, I'm going to show you an example later, is let's say if you focus on a certain element, what's going to happen is you're going to see a surge in the startups, number of startups or whatever, and then that is going to die down and not going to continue. Excellent. I can see how can I fairly value my startup. We'll talk about it in a bit. That's a big topic. All right. So what you want to do in order to, beside all of these components, what you want to do in order to build an ecosystem is three things. Is one, create this critical mass of people or startups in order to keep sustaining itself. So you get to that point where there's enough founders to start companies, and then some of them are going to exit and then get some returns, and this capital will go into new startups and create a new cycle of companies and go forward from there. Once you get to that point, you have a self-sustainable ecosystem. Second thing is create a dense network of relationship between all of these founders, the sport players, the founders, the government, and create a relationship between them in order to otherwise it's just this people all over the place that are not working together. And the thing that keeps them together is the culture. We go back all the time towards culture, but this is the glue that keeps this ecosystem together and makes it stick going forward. And how do accelerators really help in each one of these components? So if we look at finance, the accelerator really provide that early small ticket size cash that helps the founders or the startups build their MVP or really build on their products to get to the early traction where they become attractive for investors to put in money. This is the finance guy. Again, in terms of culture, so it's a big role the accelerators play in promoting the startup culture and promoting the environment where founders and startups can iterate and test things without fear of being judged. It gives them exposure to entrepreneurs that have been in their shoes and that failed or succeeded in building companies, and tells them that it's acceptable to go through that cycle. In terms of support, the accelerator really gives them access to that back office services, these mentors, advisors, what are the best practices, and really put them on the right path. Human capital, that's a straightforward one. It's teaching the basic business skills to launch a company. And market, it's really giving them, so let's say some accelerators specifically have a reach that is beyond their country or beyond the region, especially with the big ones. So it gives them exposure to larger markets, gives them roads to get to expand the region. And finally, what matters for policy is that the accelerator have a feedback loop where they can see, they have hands-on experience and have hands-on practical knowledge of what's happening with the startups. What do they really need in order to give that feedback to the government and then adjust the policy going forward. So you can see that the accelerators really impact each one of these components, and they are essential into bringing all of these elements together. Any questions before I continue?
No questions till now.
All right. So I'll give you two examples of ecosystems, let's call it that way, where one really succeeded and the other one really failed. I'm gonna take my home country actually, and what happened with the way they started, what they did anyway. what happened in 2013, 8 years ago, is that the central bank decided to invest about $400 million in the ecosystem, to build an ecosystem, entrepreneurial ecosystem in the country. And the thing that happened is that they only focused on the financing element. So if you look at these elements, they only looked at the finance. So they just injected cash into the market and didn't really take care of all the other things. Okay. So what happened, you can see the number of deals. So whenever that money got injected into the market, there's a lot of funds that came up, a lot of venture capital funds who wants to invest in startups. So you can see from 2013, we started with 10 deals per year. And then we got to about 75 deals per year in 2017 at the peak. And because there was no actual reform of the policies, of the rules, of the commercial law, of the culture, of the support systems, all of that, they were still very old and really didn't support the growth of these startups. What happened is once the money is done, these startups either failed or decided to go to another market, or the founders said, we can't operate here, or the market's too small. So you can see the number directly started to decrease. And then last year, this year, it's almost close to zero, I guess, or back to the rates where it was before in 2013. So it didn't really work out. It just created ironically, while the purpose of this was to actually bring founders and attract human capital to the country, what it made is just train these people, train founders, train and fund investors. And then once the money dried up, there's no opportunities. Everybody left and went to work somewhere else. So this is a perfect example where government really focused on only the finance component and then take care of all the other stuff. So it didn't really have a long-term effect. Just had a short-term effect of 4 to 5 years, and everything died out afterwards. Another example where there's been an overarching policy is UAE, where there's been a digital strategy for the whole country from the beginning. What they did is each and every single aspect of the ecosystem, they took care of it. They had long-term visions. They had short-term strategies to beside the money, beside the policy, beside the commercial law, beside attracting talent to the country. They managed to do all of these from all aspects. And you can see that basically by the recent exits that happened in the country. So you get companies like Amazon, like Uber, like Rocket Internet, all coming into the region, to UAE specifically, and buying out companies such as Careem, ride hailing, Souk, and Marketplace became completely Amazon now, and Talabat, they do like Zomato for food, for restaurant and food ordering. And they have the welfare accelerators. So you have the Future accelerators, you have Map 71, to the point they're offering incentives to the point where they actually pay the salaries of the startup team just if they come in and move in and set up shop in the country. So they're doing whatever is possible to attract these companies to come into the country. Let's see a question. No. So you're saying access of funds, packaging, exporting their food products. These are some of the great challenges. Definitely, this is something that accessing funds is something that all the startups struggle with. Packaging and exporting of food products, I mean, I think that's very specific to your case. But I mean, regulations and policies and laws, this is something that is very, I say, complicated. So yeah, definitely it's everywhere. So these are the case studies. This is the impact of accelerators. Before moving on to the next section, any specific, anything that is unclear about the model, how they operate, but how to join an accelerator maybe, or how to start one, I guess that's the right time to ask it. All right. Continue, Rima.
Yes, we have a question. As you mentioned, you need a critical mass of startups. In the absence of a critical mass, would you see an incubator as the first step to getting to an accelerator? From Derek.
So definitely you need to attract these. In an absence of a critical mass, you need to attract whoever is in the country or the region into one place to create that culture, to create that ecosystem. So definitely that's the first step, but it can't be the only one. So there has to be work done on all of these aspects if we're talking from government perspectives. But the accelerator or the incubator would definitely have a positive effect on all of these components, as I mentioned earlier. So the first step, bringing all these founders or wannabe entrepreneurs into one space as an incubator. And then once you see enough demand, you see what the people, what the talent needs. Because, for example, some founders would require support in marketing. Others would want support in business model canvas. So you want to see what the market really needs in the beginning before deciding how to build the accelerator. What is the dominant industry? Where can you add value? Where can you attract startups from outside the country into the country? So definitely incubator would be the first step. Yeah.
We have a second question from Besti. Can do private investors leverage accelerator programs to access a pipeline of startups?
100%. So especially for the private funded accelerators, it's the way accelerators are a way for these investors to stay in touch with the market and see what's happening, what are the ideas that are emerging, and then choose which ones to invest in or not. So a lot of the investors, they keep close relationship with the accelerators. They go in and they mentor the startups. There are investors days where all the startups come in and pitch to these investors. There's one-on-one with the partners to get feedback from them and see. And what happens usually is because the startups in an accelerator are exposed to the investors, they can adjust their business model or adapt their go-to-market strategy based on the feedback from the investors, and then makes them more attractive to receive funding from them. So definitely that's one approach. I even seen accelerators VC funds, venture capital funds invest directly in accelerators and consider that a marketing budget, marketing expense to get to build startups in a market.
Last question from Silas. Yeah. So what are the major solutions for startups to be sustained and grow to create impact?
There's no one solution. I mean, if we knew what the solutions are for a startup to be sustainable, then it would be super easy. Each startup is a specific case and their market and what they're doing, how old is the business. So the best advice for a startup to become sustainable and create impact is to stay close to their clients, listen to feedback from the market, and adjust their model. So one thing that a mentor told me is to fall in love with the pain point and not the solution, because what you are doing is solving something, a need with the people. So that could be solved 100 different ways. And not all of them are going to be economically viable or financially rewarding or actually valid solutions. So you want to take a pain point you know is real and then try out different solutions until you get to a point where this solution or this product that you build has the biggest impact or the biggest sustainability or revenue potential.
Nice.
Right?
Oh, we don't have any more questions. Yes, we do.
Great.
No, it's great. From Silas.
Right.
We have Estacio. I don't know if I'm pronouncing right, but he's raising his hand. So Makani, if you can give him the... Yes, Estacio, if you want To unmute yourself.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, thank you. Good afternoon. Hi, everyone. So my question is related with the ecosystem. We see that to ecosystem work well, we need all these fields working together. But imagine in a situation that we have a problem with market in our ecosystem. What is your suggestion in terms of improvement? Because we see mainly in Africa, many investment, poor policy, but we see that some initiative are focusing on startups and building entrepreneurship ecosystem. But imagine a situation that we have a problem in market. What is your suggestion in terms of how to improve this? How to build a marketing for a business or for any ecosystem?
Yeah. There are certain limitations on this side, definitely. Can you mute yourself, please?
We can hear echo. So.
Yeah, okay, now we can, okay, it's right. So there are certain limitations. If you're in a country of 4 million people, and then definitely the market for that country is going to be small. But what can happen is for an accelerator to help on this is to have a program of more like multiple countries in the region, and then build networks and allow for go-to-market and facilitate go-to-market to the different countries. For example, what we've done recently at Startup Bootcamp, we've launched a program across 6 African countries, which launched actually 2 months ago. So the purpose is really to combine all of these resources and have one accelerator program across these 6 countries, and then allow them to move from one another. So that's what an accelerator can do. What can be done definitely to increase the market size, on another hand, is trade agreements, collaboration between different corporates in different countries, anything that facilitates the movement of the accelerate of a startup from one country to another, or even allow startup to offer their services to different countries or different regions at the same time. So you have, for example, another program that we do is what we call launch pads. So what we're doing is bringing, for example, at Startup Bootcamp, we're bringing startups from Singapore and introducing them to the UAE market. And this is a way to, and we connect them with regulators, with corporates, with the mentors, with talent on the ground that facilitates this transition of market or increasing the size of market. All right.
I have 2 other
questions. Well responded. Thank you.
Thank you. How can partnerships such as this mitigate startup failure in the first 5 years? I'm not sure what partnerships you're referring to, Kovani. So if you can type that in, that's good. I can answer that. Please, how can startup get monitored in the business? I'm assuming you mean mentored and get advice, basically. And the way to do it is to, depending on the industry you're in. So if you're in logistics, go and find people who actually work in the logistics. Usually what I do, if I need to learn about a certain industry, I would put on LinkedIn, see who from a network really works in that industry, or ask people to tag me or to tag other people or experts that I can talk to, and simply ask them, can you help me out? I'm coming up with an idea. Can you support me on that? Another way is to go to events, so meetups, conferences, and meet people. The main point is to find where these industry experts are and go and talk to them, introduce yourself. You gotta get out of the office, you gotta get out of the house, go talk to people as much as possible. That's the best thing you can do as a founder. You're not going to be able to build a startup if you're staying at home. Right? Lastly, how can startups solve the issue of policies that negate their growth? Sometimes this can be very frustrating. I agree. I mean, that's the case with a lot of the startups, especially the more innovative ones. What happens is that, take Uber, for example, they started the ride hailing, and then the regulation at that time, they weren't really set up for that kind of business. So what Uber did is grew until they become of sizable enough, where the policy couldn't just ignore them anymore, and they worked with the regulator to solve that issue. Same thing with fintech, for example, with digital banking, with anything related to financial industry. In most cases, crypto, Bitcoin, blockchain, all of these innovative concepts, they are not regulated, or they are only regulated in a couple of countries. There is no way regulation is going to be ahead of startups. That's not going to happen. The way government works, the way they come up with policy, and time it takes to move these policies, they're too slow to be faster than startups. So usually what happens is startups come up with ideas, they become big enough, and then they force the regulator and the policy makers to change. And by the time they are changed, that they're already going to be, it's too late for the next step. But that's the name of the game. I mean, there's nothing to do about it. It is frustrating, yes. It's difficult, yes. But that's being part of a startup and building something new. It's always going to be behind. Right. Anonymous attendee, I mean startup.
I think it was about the question before of how can startups, yeah.
How can startups do
such
the question?
Such as the mitigate startup failure in the first 5 years.
How can startups mitigate the failure from in the first 5 years? First of all, you need to be comfortable with the fact that there is a risk. I mean, it's not gonna disappear. The way you can mitigate is, again, being close to the market, always making no assumptions, or validating the assumptions as often as possible. Talking to your clients, let go of all hypotheses in your head, and then focus on the customers or potential clients. That's the best way to mitigate. Unfortunately, there's no other things at this point, especially for an early stage startup. But that's yeah. Okay, perfect. Any other questions? We're good.
No more questions. Yeah.
All right.
Go ahead.
Cool. So, spoke about accelerators. We spoke about what's happening in that field. How about what's going to happen next in it? So, these are actual numbers from the market. Just the number of accelerator just blew up and grew 5 times from 2009 to 2018 across the world. So and a startup has so many options to go through. Which accelerator do they choose? Which program do they join? And which one is the best one? But really what's happening is that this is having multiple implications on the accelerator itself. So because 90% of the startups failed, whenever you have so many accelerators, the chances of them succeeding becomes less and less, because you become less selective on who you accept into the program. So that's something to be careful of. That's one. Two, the business model of an accelerator is not really profitable. in the first 5 to 10 years, 7 to 10 years, because they don't make money until they exit from the accelerator, from the startups down the line. So you need a lot of funding. So that's why you see a lot of accelerators running 1 or 2 cohorts, then they don't succeed on getting funding, and then they close down. The third thing is, what's happening in the market now is that instead of running just generic accelerators, a lot of the corporates, the big companies in the world, they want to start their own accelerators. And it becomes very difficult to compete with them, because what they offer to the startups is actually a chance to partner with them, which a typical accelerator doesn't always offer. So a startup in this case would benefit from the client base, from the assets of that corporate, of that company, and in some cases of the funding of that corporate. So it's become very difficult to compete with. And one big question mark is, in order for an accelerator to attract the best of the startups worldwide, they need to stand out from the masses. They need to be visible, let's say, and that gets harder and harder as the number of accelerators globally increases. So you might consider the model of the accelerator self-destructive on the long run. See, there's a measure in the chart. Okay, no. Then, so how do accelerators fight back? They do that by one of 2 ways. How do you stand out from the masses? How do you become more visible or prominent? One is to become more specialized. So we've seen that in the vertical accelerators, where they focus on certain technology or certain industry, and this allows them to add more value to these specific startups. So you have, for example, in China, there's a lot of accelerators about hardware. Singapore, there's a lot of fintech companies going there because they made an effort they become number 1 in terms of licensing and regulations for fintech companies. And the second way is to become global or international, to have these partnerships across countries, and allow startups to move from one country to another easily. So that's another added value that this accelerators are offering to really stand out. Finally, what I want to mention basically is a new model popping up and beside accelerators, and it's what we call venture studios. And this came as a result of so many accelerators are in the market, and they don't always have the best impact on the startups. So how this started is actually people with experience coming in and identifying themselves ideas they want to build. So instead of relying on startups applying to them, they come up with the ideas, and they see what they want to do, what they like, they validate internally what they want to do. And then once they decide they want to start a venture or a startup, they go and find the founders that can come and run it. So and instead of training or accelerating 20 startups per year, they do 2 or 3. And what the effect of this is that they are much more focused. They work with corporates to build specific ventures that have a higher chance of survival or a higher chance of success. And all of the resources are focused on these 2 or 3 ideas to really make them work, instead of bringing 20 and building a large portfolio and see what works and what doesn't. So this is a way to mitigate the risk and really focus on 2 or 3 ideas that they want to like. And the way these venture studios work is they are very agile, very lean, and they work in stages. So for example, in the beginning, they come up with an idea and they validate, they analyze the market, they identify the trends for 8 to 10 weeks. Once that is done, there is a go, no go decision, basically, that they decide if they want to build it or not. Then what they do is build the business model, figure out an MVP or a visual or a prototype and test it out in the market, decide how much money they want to raise for that. Again, another go, no go decision. So you can see these stages, they don't spend more money than required or necessary. they spend as little money as possible in order to validate the startup or the MVP, and then they move on to the next stage. Once that is the scoping and the validation done, these two stages, then they go and launch the startup in the market. They fine tune, they find product market fit, and then they grow and scale. So, and they go and raise funds for it. Once in the scaling and the building and launching or the scaling phases, they bring in founders, and then they let these founders run the startups or scale them. So that's all from my end. We can open the room for as many questions as you want. I think we still have time, right? Ian?
Yes, we still have plenty of time. So if you want to discuss more with Mohammed, you can go ahead and raise your hands also. We can allow you to speak, or just in the chat.
Any questions about accelerators, about startups, about anything you want, I'm happy to answer at this point.
So concerning the presentation, we will post everything on.
Ian, can you hear me? Yes, please, if anyone we can, any questions, yes, please do that. I think Reem got disconnected, so.
Hello.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. I thought I was given the audio. Okay, you can hear me. This is Derek. I'm from Berlin. And I thank you very much for the presentation. Very, very interesting. And I wanted to comment on the last slide you presented on venture studios. And I'm looking at Africa as a market, and considering that if you're starting an accelerator in Africa, though Africa is not a country, it is also, in terms of the critical mass, I think a challenge for any accelerator to get enough startups to work with. So, and looking at corporate side, I'm not sure that we can have that as a venture studio alternative. So would you see, you know, like a private entity using this model in Africa? Would that be something that can work? Instead of being a corporate, you would like a startup goes in there and generates these ideas, because it's all lean. You can quickly you know, prototype an idea, and then your goal would then be to look for founders that can fit into that idea and then try to market the idea.
Look, that definitely can happen, but there are certain prerequisites or required stuff for corporate to realize they can do that. One is that there has to be a mandate from the C-level directly to say we're going to go into innovative approach or innovative business models, and that's one. If they are too comfortable or they in their business, then that's not going to happen. Two, they need to realize that they can do it themselves. Most corporates can do it themselves, or they've tried it and failed at it. So that's two. So in some cases, sorry, before that, and three, in order for the venture studio to work with a corporate, they need to understand that they can do it themselves, and that there has to be some effort put from their side to identify what they can leverage or what are the assets they can use to build that venture studio. In a lot of cases, the corporates find it easier to start an accelerator than a venture studio because it takes less involvement from them. They look at what's happening in the market. But what we've seen is that corporate and accelerators don't really always give the required result. So they come in, the corporate comes in and says, this is what we're going to build. We like it. We're going to work with the startups, but eventually end up not working with anyone. So corporate engagement in accelerators is really difficult. That's why we moved to the venture building model. But yeah, does that answer? I don't know if that answers the question.
Yeah. I asked the question because I know that a company like Orange that does a lot of telecom in Africa, they have this venture studio model. And I think it's quite successful within Orange because they do it in-house and they have their entrepreneurs. But beyond that, I think for a continent like Africa where accelerator programs are a challenge to run, but on the other hand, you don't have corporates that can actually run venture studios. So there is a challenge. What about all those ideas that are there and can get from the idea stage to a launch? Because accelerators wouldn't get, you can say, okay, I'm interesting to you. So I'm looking for the bridge, how you get ideas up to the level where someone can say, okay, I notice you and I think you're interesting.
Also, I think there's a natural evolution in any market also. So you start with accelerators, you start with building the foundations until you get to a point where there's enough startups, there is enough founders, there's enough skills in the market to go to the next stage. And then once corporates see that accelerators don't work, or in specific cases didn't work, or then they can start exploring other options and see what's happening. So you can't really skip steps. In some cases, you can push the market a bit. You can see what's happening in other countries, but that's not always the case.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Right. Here's a question from Milton. How can a EIP work with other players in Accelerator Africa and building a strong ecosystem? I'm not sure I'm the best person to ask to answer this question, but I mean, there has to be an alignment of interest on the high level in order for any initiative to work. And there has to be an added advantage of that can come out of that collaboration. So the startups need to take something out of it, a value proposition that's clear in terms of funding, in terms of access to market, in terms of mentoring, in terms of business development, all of these things. So you have to find which one of the value propositions from the accelerator that you really bring into the collaboration, and then focus on that and then take it forward. So it's not always, you can't add value everywhere. You need to focus on something, on one of the elements that I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, and then take it from there slowly and discover what works and what doesn't.
Also adding to what you said, Mohammed, for the AIP. It was we are ending the program right now and the partnership, but the European Commission is planning to do other new types of programs and fundings through the New Horizon program of 2021, the Green Deal. I see pilot also, the European Innovation Accelerator. All of these things, they are premature programs. It's really booming right now. So there are a lot of factors to play on, and especially the European Commission and the World Bank is working on new programs to develop the ecosystem in Africa and the partnership between Europe and Africa. So it's just a matter of time and of learning from for example, learning from AIP, building new steps to build or to strengthen this partnership between Europe and Africa and the accelerators. We also did a lot of matchmaking events between incubators from Africa and accelerators also. During our networking event, if you didn't attend, it resulted a lot of partnerships. So it's still not mature a lot, but it's getting there, and there's a lot to focus on. So this is like a general question or a huge question that we will get the answer about in time, if you want. And also the COVID situation didn't help a lot, because we were supposed to do all of this in place. Accelerators from Africa should have visited the ones in Europe, etc. So maybe in the upcoming year, when we have less restrictions of traveling, it would be more fast to see results. So yes. We have a question from Ujunwa. I don't have fund to start up, but have an ideal, and what do I do?
So you don't need a lot of funds to start something in the beginning. You just need to find the minimum viable product that can solve a pain point. And there's a lot of tools now out there that allow you to test out an idea. You can do surveys, you can talk to people before you build anything. That's definitely something you need to do. Two, there's, for example, if you're doing a mobile app or a website, there's a lot of, if you don't have the technical know-how to do that, there are a lot of codeless platform where you can build a mobile app, or you can build a website without learning how to code. So this is something that you need to do it yourself. That's one way to do it if you don't have the technical know-how. Otherwise, is to bring in a co-founder that knows how to build some the product that you're looking for out of their own time without spending money. And you need to do whatever is possible without spending too much money to get to that basic MVP, to test it, and then get a bit of results until you're in a position where you can raise some funds. Other than that, that's the only way to do it, in my opinion. All right. Anything else?
We have a question from Robert. How do community-based youth-led organizations are supported in Africa, realizing that they are critical to transforming the communities and spur the efforts to achieve SDGs?
Okay. I'm guessing, how are these organizations supported? So definitely they are critical in achieving the SDGs. That's something we all agree on. This, building the talent, building the infrastructure for these people, developing the skills. How are they supported? Depending on what they need. I'm guessing it's financial support, it's support in terms of mentor, it's knowledge transfer, it's training, mentoring. So I guess all of these are required to support the organization, and it goes back to the 6 elements that we spoke about, how the accelerators can help. So I guess these youth organization needs to work on all of these things in order to have an impact on a community, and to build an ecosystem or to build a network.
We have also Estacio. We are in a mission of training 1 million of entrepreneurs by 2026. We would like to be part of ecosystem. How to get involved?
I guess that's for you, Reem.
Yeah. So, Estacio, if you want, we will already send a final word from the AIP if you are going to be in the AIP database main. So so we are going to send a final word about the upcoming plan of the African European Innovation Partnership, and And in this way, you can also reply, or you can contact us in the mail. I will put it in the chat. And you can send your proposal, and we can put you in contact with the European Commission on what type of trainings you're going to do, because we already work on capacity buildings for startups and for accelerators. So we have a lot of contact, we have a lot of network through the AIP and also through Horizon 2020, which will be 2021 now. So I will put you in the chat the email of the AIP, and you can send a detailed proposal, or maybe a detailed description of what you're going to do, what kind of things you need, but make sure to do it before the end of this month, because the program will end, sorry, before the end of July, because the program will end on July. So the mail will be no longer active. So, so yes.
All right. Any other questions before we wrap up? Okay. Yeah, I have one chat. Thank you. All right, Reem, I think we're good.
Yes. So thank you so much for attending. If you have any questions, it's now. And that you can always visit the website African European Innovation Partnership if you need anything before we close this program for this year. You can send your word or your proposal or your project over there, and we will match you with whatever you need. And also don't forget that tomorrow is the second day of the final event. So if you wish to continue, it's going to be also a full day of networking and matchmaking between accelerators for Africa and Europe. Thank you so much, Mohammed, for this very interesting presentation about accelerators. It was really rich. We learned a lot in a short time, which is really great. So we're going to post everything online. Also do visit the website to see our updates about presentations and trainings. And we are ending the season with you, Mohammed. You are the last training, capacity building training of the European African Innovation Partnership. It was really nice. And yes, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. It was great. And great day.
Thank you so much again. And bye. I wish you all a very nice afternoon. We'll be closing right now. So bye. Take care and bye.